Hare Krishna, everybody, and welcome to our continuing study of Bhagavad Gita. Today we'll look at the 16th chapter, Daivasura Sampad Vibhag Yoga, the divine and demoniac natures. And as always, we'll start with some kirtan.
Musician's audio. Haribol, sweet souls. Make sure you can see Amy too. She tries to hide. We got her. Yeah. Okay, sweet souls. Come into a comfortable seat.
If someone's trying to get in, I can't see, so we'll just wait for afterwards, I guess.
Or you can look on my computer.
Okay.
Okay. So shift from side to side until you come into a place where you can remain still, sort of shake off the remnants of your day. Find your breath. Soften your jaw. Let's take a clearing breath together. Inhale through your nose, fill up. Open your mouth, exhale, let it go. Our opening prayers, this invocation is honoring of all of our teachers, the acharyas who walk this path before us, bestowing the light of knowledge upon us, removing the darkness of ignorance. We honor all spiritual teachers of all spiritual paths, of all spiritual lineages. Inhale. Om Jnana-Timirandasya Jnana-Shalakaya Chakshunattam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Short kirtan, call and response. Calling out for divinity to manifest in your heart. Calling out, oh Radha, oh Krishna, please engage me in your service. I'm yours. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna
Hare Krishna. Om Ajnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuruniritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch lamp of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hope everyone's well. It's great to be with all of you live, and also those who are watching the recording. We're also connected. Hare Krishna. So we'll start the 16th chapter today, third last chapter. What? And yeah, we were going to kind of talk about what we're going to do after we finish. We never really finished, but after we get through the Bhagavad Gita, because I don't want to stop talking about these books and how they apply in our lives. And apparently some of y'all feel the same. So maybe we can just kind of like sit on that and offer up perspectives in the WhatsApp and YouTube comments and in person. And options are the Nectar of Instruction, which is a very practical book. It's about how to actually practice bhakti, especially the first, I would say, 8 verses are exceptionally, they're about like what qualities to develop and how to actually do. It's all about the how bhakti. The last 4, it's only 13 verses long, but the last 4 are a little more esoteric. So that's a really good one for those who are practicing bhakti and want to refine.
What was it called again?
The Nectar of Instruction, also translated by Srila Prabhupada, originally written in Sanskrit by Rupa Goswami, one of the primary students of Lord Chaitanya. That's an option.
I think that's the best
next
step.
Another possibility is the Srimad Bhagavatam, but that's 18,000 verses or so.
You can start.
I mean, I read the Bhagavatam every day, but it's not like we're going to get through the whole Bhagavatam in anything less than a couple of years. More than that, really. But just putting it out there. So Eileen said they're studying the Nectar of Instruction in their temple study group. Awesome. Yeah, just putting it out there that I'm this is what I want to be doing. So whatever you want, let it be known, and we'll I'm here to serve all of you. Yeah. Eva says open to anything, and I will be there. Awesome. That's what I'm looking for. That's pretty much what I feel too. Tanya's in too. Great. So yeah, so chapter 16, moving into today, we read chapter 15, Purushottam Yoga, the means of connection of the Supreme Person. Purusha Uttama, Purushottama, the Supreme Person. Purusha means person, Uttama means supreme. Understanding the Supreme Source as the Supreme Person. And let's start there. Let's start, before we get into chapter 16, with reflections. I noticed a few really nice ones in WhatsApp. You can reiterate those. You can reiterate what other people put in the chat. Anything that stood out from your own readings or hearing of the class or the recording. Let's get a couple reflections to get us going, get us up to speed. How was chapter 15 for you? What did you hear?
I'll start.
Yes, thank you.
The tree, image of the tree and the reflection really stood out to me.
Yeah.
The branches.
You can all hear her okay, right? Awesome.
Yeah. The roots, the branches, the directions they grow, what each part of the tree represents as far as the limbs and the tips of the tree, the senses and the elements and whatever else that was there. That really stood out to me.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I had a question about is verse 17. It talks about 3 worlds.
Sure, let's look at that. So first of all, the tree analogy is pretty elaborate. Krishna uses it and he goes over it for several chapters, several verses rather. And yeah, it's the banyan tree. Like there's a picture of it in the WhatsApp chat. You can also just Google banyan tree. It's like elaborate root system, beautiful, but exceptionally intricate. Like each banyan tree is like its own little biome there's so many like animals and birds and insects and things that live in them. They go up and down. Literally, the roots are super complicated and variegated. And Krishna is saying that the world is like that. It's an upside down tree because it's a reflection of the spiritual reality. And the point of that section was, aside from helping us conceive of the material world, is to connect it to that spiritual reality that is its source. And he directly guides us there that don't try to figure it out. Don't try to explore it up and down. Don't try to enumerate it and calculate it and categorize it. Try to find its root and submit yourself there. So don't make it your permanent home. And your second question was about verse 17, right? Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the supreme soul, the imperishable Lord himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. Loka trayam. Loka means place. We get the word location. Loka actually means, in this context, zones of the material world. So in the cosmology of the material universe, which is elaborated on more in more detail in the Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly in cantos 2 and 3, there are 14 general divisions of the material world, which are divided into three larger groupings: upper, middle, and lower. That's what's being referred to here. So in the material world, there are the upper planetary systems, lower planetary systems, and middle planetary systems. Planetary system doesn't necessarily mean like an astrological concept, like you think of like Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Saturn. It's any place, a plane of existence that is defined by a certain level of consciousness and certain modes of nature, which is what places it in those hierarchies. We happen to be in the middle. We happen to be near the middle. We're like the 8th from the bottom or 7th from the top, just about exactly in the middle, this particular loka. And so the bottom, anyway, 4, 5, 4, so you get lower, middle, upper. And they have to do with, as mentioned in the 14th chapter too, if you are in the mode of goodness when you leave your body, but you have to come back to the material world, you are qualified for a higher planetary system. And mode of passion, more middle, mode of ignorance, lower. And yeah, does that help? Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to get more into the kinds of qualities one can cultivate in the 16th chapter. Krishna gets into the daiva, divine, and asura, the demonic or averse to divine, non-divine qualities. And one of the results of those kinds of cultivations is it determines your destination in the lokas. Every place is kind of like tailor-made to some degree. Just like even within this particular planet, we just went to Hawaii, and Hawaii is like a little heavenly planet on the earth. You still have the basic situation of what it's like to live on earth, but it's also like a lot sweeter, easier, more sattva. And it can be born into like a really awful war zone or something somewhere, that's also possible. But the general picture of what the earth offers is like a pretty standard range. And the idea is that in different lokas, there are different ranges, either higher or lower. And in terms of comforts and amenities. Yeah. Good question. Prabhupada, if you read the purports in general, then those are the kinds of things that Prabhupada elaborates on, because the verses of Bhagavad Gita don't elaborate on them to the greatest degree. Like Prabhupada, Krishna mentions them in the 8th chapter. He mentions the material world, but like in 4 or 5 verses. So if you read the purports to sections you find confusing or you want more elaboration on, a lot of the time, Srila Prabhupada will either directly explain it, or he'll offer reference to parts of like the Srimad Bhagavatam that can shed more light.
Okay.
Because he is drawing from all of that stuff. Part of his devotional genius. Great. Any more reflections on chapter 15? Leanne. You're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was really connecting to, it looks like 4, 5, and 6, where he talks about surrender quite often in those. And it kind of like, when I reread and then re-listened, it like came to me that I like to surrender, right? So because I compared it to restorative yoga. So it's very interesting how that just like kept coming out to me, where it was just like pretty much standing out, the surrender. And I really love how he talks about it and how it, it really can dissipate your anxiety, your attachment to certain things. So yes, I appreciate
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, in bhakti, we're practicing what you could call sweet surrender. Like in the material context, the word surrender is not a good word. It's not a good concept. It's like what you do when you lose a war. You give up. It means you've been defeated, which no one wants to have happen to them in the material context. Spiritually speaking, actually, it's not like that. It's just not a power relationship. It's not about subjugation, exploitation, repression, suppression, oppression. It's not about that. It's about voluntarily giving yourself. And actually, Krishna, the nature of bhakti is such that Krishna is so attracted by the principle of surrender that he surrenders himself to his devotee. It's not one way. We're not just going for like, you're the greatest and I'm, like an insignificant part of you, I surrender. That's true. That is true. It's a fact. But bhakti actually develops into a relationship of equals where there's mutual surrender for the sake of relationship. So it's actually very sweet. Because when we surrender in the process of bhakti, we're surrendering to that. We're surrendering to the possibility of connecting through love, to connecting freely, not impelled by force, not impelled by, well, you have to because you're in trouble, so you need me, or you have to because you're small and I'm big. It's not about that. So it's actually a very sweet thing. That word I find is a really useful word for bringing out the difference between what spiritual and material looks like, because surrender is like the most wonderful thing in the spiritual context. And in the material context, like, oh, I give up, white flag, it's over. My life is ruined. I lose, you win. What do you want? Now what? You're going to humiliate me? I surrender. It's not like that.
Yeah, you said that bhakti, like the process of bhakti is like a process of surrender, and it's surrender in motion.
Yeah, the practice of surrender.
Yeah.
Bhakti is the practice, is applying the principles of surrender into my life deliberately. Yeah, it's not just like all up here. It's also not just here. It's like, as I pointed out, Srila Prabhupada translated bhakti as devotional service. It's feeling and action based on the feeling. It's practical. And there's a relationship between the two things. It's like, by doing the activities of bhakti, I develop a feeling for Krishna. By having a feeling for Krishna, I'm motivated to do activities of bhakti. One time, Srila Prabhupada was relating to one of his very new disciples in the 60s, who said, Srila Prabhupada, I see the devotees put their head down. I don't feel like putting my head down. What do I do? And Srila Prabhupada could see this person was very sincere and they were very surrendered to him. They wanted to follow him. So he gave them the instruction that they were ready for, because they had revealed through their activities and their relationship with Prabhupada, they were surrendered to him. Whatever he said they would do, they loved him. And he said, put your head down anyway, because by doing that, you will develop a feeling. Put your head down in the right place, in other words. Do it for Krishna. See how it feels. I mean, there's a reason why the Muslims all put their heads down. The reason why bowing is like such a prominent part of spiritual culture, even material culture. Like the Japanese, they bow. East Asia, they bow. It's like very humble. It is actually a visceral thing that when you put yourself low, something happens. As one of my teachers put it, it's very hard to feel angry with your head against the ground. So things happen when, put your heart above your head, get down. So that's one of the activities of bhakti. And if you do that in the direction of the Lord or his devotees, it's actually a practice of bhakti. So this doing sometimes creates the feeling, and the feeling also feeds into the doing. In that way, they're connected. Thank you. Eileen has their hand up. You are muted.
Well, I'm just picking up where Leanne left off and muting myself too. I'll pick up where my beautiful goddess sister left off, because surrender was kind of what I got from this as well. And you said something that I loved. It was before I heard the surrender part, it was like, we don't need to completely reject the world, but we renounce the selfish tendencies and let go of us being the master of the world. And so
Right.
we cut it off, but we connect the things in the material world to Krishna. And in that way, that was kind of like, okay, that leads me to that idea of surrender, where we use our intelligence to figure out what you can, and then the rest we surrender to. And that was like something else that you had said that I just loved, that, yeah, we're still in this world. We still have to do the things. We're not going to completely reject it. And we've been given intelligence by Krishna to kind of understand the knowledge he's giving us, but surrenders that special little piece that, we add on with bhakti. So like that mood of, okay, let me do the study, let me figure it out, then allows us to hear from him. And through that, we can ask him for surrender, and then we can bring our lives more into bhakti consciousness. So I kind of got the same thing that, Leanne did, but I like the idea that, like, we're here, we got to deal with being here. But what's that we do it so we can transcend it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, there's like this back and forth relationship between detachment and surrender. So by cultivating detachment, for example, in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna says you should use your own senses, your intelligence, like the ability to create logical conclusions, scripture, and traditional wisdom, which can include songs and folk music and like art and whatever, your grandma told you. Use all these things to understand that the world is not a stable place. You don't belong here. It's not going to, whatever you have here is not going to last. So that's detachment. And when one realizes that can support one's surrender. It's like, oh, everything I've been working for is temporary. My investments in this world are temporary. I really should turn toward the divine, right? So detachment can lead to surrender. And as Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport to 15.3.4, in the purport, he says here, Krishna says, I'm the origin of everything. Therefore, to get out of the entanglement of the strong banyan tree of material life, one must surrender to Krishna. As soon as one surrenders unto Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. By practicing surrender, you become detached, you get support, right? You actually get the help to become, because if you're practicing surrender, you're telling Krishna, help me, please. Because I am attached to these things. I have been for some time. And, Prabhupada gave the analogy, it's like a fan. You unplug it from the wall. Does the fan stop turning? Not really, not right away. I mean, it slows down, but it still goes. So it's like, okay, Krishna, I'm trying to pull this thing out, but it's still turning. Like I'm still attached. So I'm asking for help. That's what you're doing when you surrender. And so you get support in becoming detached from the things you have been falsely or improperly attached to. So in this way, detachment supports surrender, and surrender supports detachment. And that's really good news, because it means even if you're super attached and you haven't done any work in realizing that you don't belong here, and you're like full of lust and greed and selfish desire, if you just start practicing bhakti, you practice surrender, you get support that you were like otherwise completely unqualified for. You find like your raging hankering starts to like subside. You become simpler, which in turn supports further progress in bhakti and surrender. Tanya.
Just one more thing about the banyan tree analogy and, getting to surrender. I found it really interesting, the discussion of, not trying to figure out every single detail, right? Because in our intelligent mind, we can allow that to be a distraction to surrender. Like, I'll surrender once I figure it all out. Like, and I just thought that was really interesting that at some point you figure out what's important and really focus on on the origin and the root to bring you to that surrender sooner. Because, you know, as an intelligent person myself, like I want to know all the facts, and I can very easily postpone that surrender if I just keep twirling on all the facts and getting it all and making sure that I have every corner figured out before I get there. So I thought that was very interesting, because at some point you know, just like in our emotional worlds, we can keep, if you keep the noise going and you never quiet your mind, you don't hear, you know, the divine speaking with you. And there's a lot of people that do that, like just keep that going. And I'm one of them, you know, that just keep that going for a really long time. So I just thought that was really poignant, is that, you know, you got to let go of some of the details so that your mind can absorb it and really get to that point of surrender.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because, you know, we don't follow a system of blind belief, so we're meant to apply our intelligence for sure. And it's God-given, right? That's what it's there for. At the same time, there's this really visceral way in which actually, like, exactly what you're talking about can happen. People can use that, well, let me get a little more knowledge, let me do my research, let me figure it out, as a way of stalling and as a way of protecting themselves. As it's like, at some point you got to jump off the diving board, you know, right? In life, in general, at some point you have to take a risk and apply yourself. Now it's important to use the intelligence to take a measured risk, so you're not, like, you know, jumping into, like, oh, I mean, there could be, like, you know, spikes down there, but whatever. No, you have to be well reasoned with your faith. There should be well reasoned faith. So that's useful, but there's also a cap. There's a limit. There's a ceiling on how much you can experience until you try to apply yourself within the realm of that which you cannot figure out before applying yourself, right? There's only so much advanced scouting you can do before you run up against, well, how about you just try and get out there, you know? Like, there's only so much your parents can tell you about the bicycle before you get on it and try to pedal. And if you fall off of it, that's okay, because that's part of the process. But you can't learn how to ride a bike on YouTube. You got to get on the thing, right? So it's like that. Some comments. Yeah, intellectualization can be such a powerful way to keep us detached from the root, because the root is painful. But once we have that awareness, it's harder to get past it, because you know the answer. The veil lifts, and then you get to choose. Aaron says, I joked to Shannon on Saturday that I can't project manage my way into bhakti as much as I would like to. Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could, it wouldn't really be that great of a thing in the first place, would it? Because you could, like, wrap your little head around it. It's like, it's pretty limited. Turns out it's a lot bigger than us. So yeah. I mean, anything worth doing, anything really inspiring ends up being bigger than us anyway. Like, the more you study something, the more, if you really fall in love with it, like an art form or science, and we're like, oh wow, this is so deep, I'll never get to the end of it in this lifetime. Like, if you study music, you know, I have, like, a little bit of training in music. I just taught myself from reading things, and it's like, oh wow, this is unbelievable. Like, music is infinitely deep. It never stops being boring. The closer you look at it, the more details and beautiful things come up. It's like, okay, that's meant to inspire us, not to try to figure it out more, but to be like, wow, Krishna, you know, aren't you amazing that there's this incredible art form? And it helps engender appreciation for the divine. It's like, so that if that's true of music or biology, or you name your favorite arts, craft, or hobby, then it's definitely true of the divine. And you don't get to appreciate music by thinking about it. You have to actually play it and listen to it, be in it. So similarly, there's only so much you can do with your intellectual grasping capacity. And on that note, let's move into chapter 16. Devasura Sampad Vibhag Yoga, the varieties of Deva and Asura, divine and demoniac natures. So in this chapter, Krishna deals with the qualities, characteristics of persons. And primarily, he doesn't really talk about specific people. Doesn't say this person is demoniac, this person is divine. He talks about the qualities. So it's important to remember this, that Krishna is helping us to understand what the symptoms are of somebody who's elevating and what the symptoms are of somebody who's degrading. And because people are complicated, life is complicated, you can have both going on at the same time. It is said that in previous ages, the divine and demoniac persons existed on different lokas, different planes of existence, different planets. And as time went on, they existed in different countries on the same planet. Then they existed in different parts of the same city, on the same country, the same planet. Now they exist in the same person. And this is like natural. This is natural.
Different kind of evolution.
Yeah, we're talking here about the evolution of consciousness. It's not about, oh, us and them. I'm good, they're bad, or I'm bad, they're good. It's about refining our internal realm. What qualities are we cultivating? So on that note, Krishna starts verses 1 to 3. I'll share the screen here. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, means spiritual texts, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from business, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, freedom from envy, and freedom from the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, Arjuna, belong to godly persons endowed with divine nature. So these are qualities that are associated with persons who are elevating themselves. And you could give an entire class on every one of them. You know, what is like aversion to fault finding, not taking pleasure in finding fault with others. This is actually like such a big thing. Like, you know, practically 50% of the internet is just used for insulting and sarcasm and putting people down. You know, we're really good at that. It's actually tamasic quality to put people down. You know, it's not actually a refined quality at all. So Krishna starts that way, continues. Pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of demoniac nature. And the difference is in 5, he says, the transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demoniac qualities make for bondage. So the idea is that, as I mentioned earlier in the Bhagavad Gita discussion, like around the word sin means that which takes us away from the divine. It's not about judgment or punitive punishment. It's not about like an abstract good or bad. It's not abstract. It's very concrete. It's like, does it take you away from your consciousness of the divine, right? So one of the things he lists as a quality of divine, and the Sanskrit word daiva is where we get the word divine, is compassion for all living entities, or freedom from non-violence. You know, if you practice violence in your life, it is very difficult to connect to the Supreme because of what it does to your consciousness. It actually contracts one's consciousness. Whereas if you practice not being violent, it is a practice. You have some capacity, you know, not perfect capacity, because you can't walk down the street without breathing in and killing a bunch of bacteria and stepping on bugs. But if you try to minimize your impact of violence in the world, you purify your consciousness such that you are supported in connecting to the Supreme. So in this way, all these qualities have to do with what is conducive toward turning towards Krishna, the Supreme, spiritual truth, spiritual practice. And the demoniac means that which distracts us, covers up that part of our consciousness, makes it hard to remember that, so forth. So Krishna's going to talk about primarily the demoniac qualities. He's talked about the divine in other places in Bhagavad Gita. But in order to protect us, we have to know what the negative is to avoid it. That's why lists of these are there. Now, notably, this is not what Bhagavad Gita focuses on. Quite the opposite. Krishna focuses on the positive, because that's what elevates us. But if you only talk about the positive and you never talk about the negative, you're actually doing a disservice to your students and to people who are hearing, because on the one hand, you have to know where you're going. On the other hand, you have to know how to not fall off to the left or right. You have to know what doesn't work, what getting lost looks like, right? Don't take that first exit, take the next exit. Don't turn left to the right, turn right, right? You have to know these things, the don'ts of life. So he's going to describe what demoniac consciousness is like. And we'll hear in that mode. Verse 8. Asatyam apratishthang te jagat ahuranishvaram aparaspara kimanyat kama haitakam. They say that this world is unreal, with no foundation, no God in control. They say it is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. So the demoniac conclusion about reality is that it's simply produced by the generation of living entities creating more living entities. It's all just random, it's arbitrary, it has no actual purpose, it's meaningless. There's nobody in control, there's nothing in control, there's no boss, there's no God, there's just chaos. That's actually a demoniac idea. It's an idea that turns one away from the supreme controller, the possibility that there is some order or some, what to speak of, source, a personal source, a source with benevolence, with will, with intention, with the capacity to be connected to. So continuing, Krishna in verses 13 to 15 gives a little bit of like a dramatic performance, what it sounds like to receive the thought, the thoughts of somebody who's absorbed in demonic qualities. He says, the demoniac person thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more. He is my enemy, and I have killed him, and my other enemies will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man surrounded by aristocratic relatives. There is none so powerful and happy as I am. I shall perform sacrifices, I shall give some charity, and thus I shall rejoice. In this way, he says, such persons are deluded by ignorance. It's like revealing the inner workings of somebody who is completely dedicated to living a selfish life, right? That's like a little bit of that in everybody, basically, while we're conditioned. But when you put it out there, it sounds like an exaggeration. It sounds like a bad guy in a movie. It's like so over the top. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that there is an aspect of our consciousness that kind of just wants to be completely reckless and run over people and do whatever is necessary for our own selfish and short-term satisfaction. And it's like Krishna is pointing out, this is the voice of that part of us. This is what somebody who's dominated by that thinks like. This is what they feel, and this is how they're motivated. 16, thus perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions, they become too strongly attached to sense enjoyment and fall down into hell. So the idea is that living like this creates anxiety. This is the first point. People live like this to maximize their comfort, and they end up creating tremendous anxiety. They become too strongly attached to sense enjoyment. One becomes overly concerned with how to enjoy in this world, and that creates problems, and then falls down into hell. Here's an interesting word. This is like one of the scary words of spiritual life. Are we talking about heaven and hell here? What are we talking about? So this chapter is going to talk about consequences for our cultivation of consciousness, consequences for activities. So there has to be some. Just like if we're saying, my practice of bhakti is consequences that Krishna is drawn to me and I'm drawn to him, and I become purified and all these things happen and the relationship between myself and the divine thickens. That's a consequence. So similarly, as unpleasant as it may be, we're going to hear about the consequences of cultivating lower consciousness. Now, I will pause at this point and mention that generally people in this part of the world, when they hear the word hell, that's in the word actual hell. It's in the context for them. The association is of Judeo-Christian thought, particularly post-Reformation Protestant ideas of Christianity, which have to do with the idea of like an eternal hell. And without getting too much into Christian theology, even that is based on certain assumptions that people made at certain times within Christianity and other traditions. In our tradition, in Bhagavad Gita, in the Vedic scriptures, the soul is eternal and it can occupy different positions, but it doesn't occupy any one position in the material world eternally, neither hellish nor heavenly, because that would defeat the purpose of growing. It's like, okay, you passed the test, now you are in the top class forever. It's like, what? Oh, you failed the test, so now you're in remedial class forever. What? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. So let's just get that out of the way. There is no such thing as, this is not what Krishna is talking about when he says dwelling in hell. And we'll substantiate that. It's not just my belief system or my wishful thinking. He actually proves that here in a chapter. More about the consciousness of the demoniac. Self-complacent, verse 17. Self-complacent and always impudent, deluded by wealth and false prestige. They sometimes proudly perform sacrifices in name only, without following any rules or regulations. Bewildered by false ego, strength, pride, lust, and anger, the demons become envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in their own bodies and in the bodies of others, and blaspheme against the real religion. Here, what it's talking about is to cause offenses against the presence of God within ours and other people's bodies. This is how Prabhupada translates that as the real religion. The Lord is situated in, this is in the Sanskrit, he's in our body, he's in the bodies of others. Not seeing that, not acting in relationship to that degrades us. This was alluded to in chapter 13. Krishna says, one who controls their mind is not degraded by it. In that way, they don't, I'm going to refer to that verse rather than speculate on it. It's a nice verse in the 13th chapter I'm remembering, and to make the point, and also to show all of you, we don't guess.
Mm-hmm.
The verse I'm thinking of is 29. 13:29. Krishna said, one who sees the super soul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade themselves by their mind. Thus they approach the transcendental destination. If I see that the divine is within you, I remember that it's equally present everywhere, then I don't degrade myself by artificially separating you from the divine, minimizing you, making you an animal or less than an animal, not divine, not worthy of appreciation, not worthy of dealing with in a divine way. So my point was, in the demoniac consciousness, eventually people come to a point where they cause offenses, they cause harm to others because of their cultivation of selfish motives, because of their strong material attachments that have been mentioned, the bewilderment due to false ego, strength, their wealth and false prestige they may have, and becoming intoxicated by that, they start to cause offenses. And what happens at this point is Krishna puts them in timeout, right? Just like for a child, you know, if a child gets like too rambunctious, put in timeout. So Krishna says in 19, those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, I perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. So again, this word perpetually is contextual. His casting people who are qualified for degradation is perpetual. Their being in that position is not perpetual. They don't stay there necessarily. We know that because he goes on. He says, such persons can never approach me. Gradually they sink down to the most abominable type of existence. However, he says, there are 3 gates leading to this hell: lust, anger, and greed. Every sane person should give these up, for they lead to the degradation of the soul. In verse 22, the person who has escaped these 3 gates of hell, O son of Kunti, performs acts conducive to self-realization and thus gradually attains the supreme destination. So it's not about condemnation. It's not about categorizing people. It's about how Krishna impartially recognizes what we're asking for and what we're qualified for, and portions that out, including the consequences of our degrading behavior. And at the same time, he's offering that, hey, every human being who can hear the Bhagavad Gita, here's what you should know. Lust, anger, and greed are the gates to this place, to this degradation. You can become purified of them. You can perform acts conducive to realization to escape that. This is a open front door, open back door existence. You can go where you like. And in order to do that, you have to know how things work. So part of Bhagavad Gita is that it's helping us understand the consequences of our actions. We can degrade ourselves. And these kinds of hellish situations can exist even in this world, what to speak of other lokas where things are harsher and more difficult and more punitive for the sake of reformation. Even in this world, we can suffer from the consequences of our activities. The example I gave really early in Bhagavad Gita was addiction. Addiction, by improper use of our free will, we actually become addicted to something, some substance or some activity. And even in this life, we can see the experience of being addicted is an experience of decreased agency, decreased freedom, decreased enjoyment, right? You actually suffer from that. At some point, you can think, oh, I don't even want this anymore. What am I doing with this? And yet you can't fully get yourself out. It's so sticky. You have to work really hard and get support to get out. However, you can get out. In this life or another, you can. The point is that you're not stuck there forever, but in order for the lesson to stick, sometimes there's difficulty. Sometimes there's consequences, right? So that's the idea here. The idea is that, as we can see in our own lives, and even in this world, there are hellish and heavenly situations. There are consequences that are negative and unpleasant. There are consequences that are positive and uplifting, inspiring. And these are purposeful, ultimately. They're not meant for like, okay, well, because life is like that, I want to live in such a way where I maximize the happy and minimize the sad. And I'm going to like do whatever I got to do to make that happen. That's actually not the point. That's kind of what the demoniac people do. That's kind of what demoniac consciousness is about. It's actually about, okay, what am I meant to learn? What is my lesson here? What put me in this difficult situation? What put me in this positive situation? What is degrading? What is uplifting? And the thrust of his message here is to offer, again, the same thing I've been saying over and over again, offer us this realization that our choices matter. They matter because we can perform acts conducive to self-realization and thus gradually attain the supreme destination. 2 verses left. 23. They who discard scriptural injunctions and act according to their whims attain neither perfection, nor happiness, nor the supreme destination. In other words, just trying to figure it out yourself and disregarding spiritual wisdom doesn't help. Last verse. One should therefore understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the scriptures. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that they may be gradually elevated. The Krishna is positioning us in terms of our relationship with spiritual knowledge. It's there to protect us. It's providing guardrails so we don't fall off. That's why it's there. That's why humans have it. Aside from different ways in which spiritual traditions or knowledge or whatever can be misused, this is the proper use. This is why Krishna descends and transmits spiritual knowledge to his prophets and saints and sons and daughters. And that's why it's propagated, to provide guardrails for human life, to provide guidebooks, to give us context and to give us support in our specific situations. And that's it. That's the whole chapter. With that, we'll pause and take any reflections, any comments. This is probably the most. It's in some ways it's the heaviest chapter of Bhagavad Gita because it deals with the don'ts. It deals with hellish situations, negative consequences, and degradation. But it does so from a place of compassion, just like any system of punishment is ultimately, in its true sense, if it's applied properly, is not meant for punitive, controlling, or power trips. It's meant for integration and upliftment. It's meant for helping people to find their best self. And Krishna is certainly coming at it from that perspective. He wants us to be supported in finding our best self and acting in that way, in those ways. So yeah, let's take any comments or questions. Anything that stood out? Any reflections? Yeah.
I had a question.
Yes.
Maybe
This
you
is
could
Aaron.
expand a little bit more about, you said Krishna has the ability to put us in a spiritual timeout.
Right.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one example, a drastic example, if somebody misuses the human body extremely badly, they misuse the freedom that the human body offers to systematically and repeatedly cause trouble for others, they can be taken out of a human body for their next birth for some time. They lose the capacity to make the choices that a human being could choose, and that's a kind of timeout. I gave an example earlier, like within a human life, if you misuse your free will, you lose the capacity to use your free will as cleanly and as powerfully as you could before. You lose agency. When you're addicted to something, even if you want to get free from it, you find that you're drawn to it helplessly. In that way, your freedom is actually impinged. You have less strength. That's a kind of, I don't want to use the word punishment because it sounds like, oh, addicts or people who are suffering, they're just being punished. But it's a reaction. It is a reaction. And there is an experience of that. And it's a consequence, a negative one. It's a very painful thing to have agency taken away from you. However, the point is that there is purpose in it. Ultimately, there's meaning in it. And so that's an example, a kind of example, or a realm of examples within a life, and in the broader scheme, because we can be born into all kinds of different bodies. We can lose temporarily the privilege of a human life, just like a child can lose their dessert privileges or their allowance or their car privileges if they're a teenager. It's like, okay, no, I've laid out the rules and you've broken them, and so there are consequences, and I don't want to do it, but I will have to. I've had to now, and this is the consequence. You can't go to prom or whatever, So yeah, I hope that helps. There's a lot of different ways it can manifest.
Would another example be if someone actually took their own life, committed suicide?
Someone took their own life?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
They committed suicide. They
What-
killed themselves.
What about that?
Like, is that like a consequence? Do they go to a lower level, or like, does that make sense?
Is there a consequence for suicide?
Yeah, just thinking about like, as someone that's addicted to something, right? It's an action
Right.
that they do to themselves. But, for someone that may have mental health issues or may not be able to take their medicine and they end up, killing themselves in some fashion,
Right.
what is like, is there anything talked about in that respect?
Yeah. The first thing is that there's nothing formulaic. There's nothing ever formulaic, because everyone's situation is unique.
Right.
So there's no like way to answer that in a general.
Yeah.
And just like we see, like Krishna's attitude in this chapter and throughout Bhagavad Gita is coming from care.
Right.
So the statements of scripture are also coming from care. In general, the idea like suicide is not a good thing because you're ending your life prematurely. And because of that, statements around it are like, well, just like don't, because it's not good for you in the long run. It's an attempt at a solution to a problem that doesn't actually solve it, because given the time scale that Bhagavad Gita is talking about, the soul doesn't end with a life anyway. It's an attempt to escape from something you can't escape from by doing that. So what I find useful is, instead of like talking about suicide, is to talk about it in an indirect way. It's like, okay, look, if I have a test tomorrow or next week, if I choose to procrastinate on studying for that test, I don't actually solve the problem of the test, because it's going to happen anyway, right? I just can create like this blissful ignorance thing where I, go out and do whatever I feel like doing. And it's like, pretend it's not going to happen. The night before, I freak out or I fail the test, but the tests of life continue. So because of that, the statements of scripture are strongly warning against that, because it's not just like a bad idea in the long term. It's extremely damaging. It hurts so many people when someone leaves prematurely. It leaves so many ripples. And for the sake of an intact social structure and peace of mind, we don't want people considering that an option, because it's really not.
Right.
And the context of a suicide bad is that it exists in a culture that supports people to be healed of, you're talking about like mental illness, the misunderstanding that my problems are eternal, or that I have no value, or I cannot be redeemed. Often in suicide, there's shame. There's an idea that I have no worth. Better I die. I've lost face. I have no honor. And those are misunderstandings according to the message of Bhagavad Gita. We have honor, we have worth eternally. And so an intact spiritual culture addresses those misunderstandings so people don't feel motivated to end their life. But yeah, if one does, there is some consequence, temporary, and one doesn't know what that would be. Depends on the circumstance. And it's also a gray area because look, if you're like 85 years old and you've lived a full life and you have like a terminal illness and you get to like the last month of it and the writing's on the wall and your body's falling apart, you have full authorization from scripture also to be like, okay, I'm done with food and drink. I'm gonna say my goodbyes to family. I've laid out my will. I'm gonna just chant and be in kirtan and go to the spiritual places and just like whatever it happens, it happens. I'm done with that. It's not suicide anymore. You know, that's different, even though you can say, well, they're not trying to live anymore, so it's like they're killing themselves. Well, no. So where does that line get drawn? I'm not qualified to say. However, a lot of it is intention, right?
So then how do like make sense of it in your mind for those who have loved ones or know people who have taken their life, and how to like how to find an understanding that's not like condemning or shaming or they did something they weren't supposed to do, but how to rectify that?
Yeah, well, you know, when Srila Prabhupada was heading up the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, he was, just to give a parallel, he was like the only senior devotee in the movement. You know, there was a lot of really young people, young physically and young emotionally and young spiritually, who were coming and going. And some of them were looking for something cool and radical and funky. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, this is cosmic. Let's go to the Hare Krishna temple. And they would join for some time and they would leave. And it was the 60s.
Yeah.
And 70s. And some people were more serious and they would stay or they would leave. And so there was different levels of, you know, and it's an open door. And sometimes the devotees would look at that, devotees who were like stable in their practice, and they would say, like, oh, this person wasn't serious. They blooped, they left. You know, they left. They're like, they're gone. They're like, they weren't serious. And Prabhupada said, whenever anybody leaves the association of devotees, we should ask what inside them made them do it, and what inside us that how we fell short. 50% of the consequences are, what did we do that we didn't help them see this is what's best for them, that we didn't give them what they need. We didn't create a home for them to feel safe here, right? So scriptures for the living. If somebody's gone, they're gone. But it's for us at this point to try to create the cultures, the structures, the societies that support people while they are alive, to want to stay alive, to want to elevate themselves and not degrade themselves, to feel that they have worth. That's the message I've taken away. And there are actually countless, I would say at least a half dozen examples given in the lives of saints and saintly persons, including the associates of Lord Chaitanya, including in a relationship with Lord Chaitanya in his pastimes when he was on the planet 500 years ago, that substantiate that Krishna he cares about us, and we're meant to care deeply about each other. And that's the takeaway.
And he's still caring for those who chose to,
of
end their
course,
lives.
because the whole first lesson of Bhagavad Gita is that we're not our body, we're just passing through. And Krishna is delivering this message over and over and over again for all of us always. So anybody is, no matter what happened in their last life, they're continuing somewhere.
Well, that was another thing that I remember in one of the chapters you talking about, like, that you get to take, I think it was right when my uncle passed too, like, you get to take whatever you learned from this life with you too, which was such a like, whew, thank goodness that he doesn't have to do that all over again.
Right.
Right. And I think the same way about when you're talking about this, like, are they going to take everything that they learned to the next life with them, so that maybe it won't be the same choice?
Yeah, it's forward progress.
Yeah.
And the other point is that, you know, we do what we can in this world to support people. And if somebody leaves in that way, it's tragic and it's awful. We support those who are left behind because there's a process of healing around that, you know. And also for those who are departed, we pray for them. We ask for support. We remember them, you know, just as we remember anybody who leaves. Like there is a beautiful, very rich tradition of mourning, of grieving, of recalling the people who've passed away, our relatives, our friends, our loved ones in the Vaishnava and the Hare Krishna, the Bhakti tradition, regardless of how they passed. And that applies to anybody we hold in our heart. You can, for example, one thing you could do is you can offer Krishna food and then take the remnants, the prasadam, and offer it to a picture of the person, your departed grandfather, your friend, this person who's committed suicide, that person, whoever. And you offer them the spiritual benefit of that prasada, wherever they happen to be, in whatever, you know, plane of existence. By application of your will, you pray for that, and you offer that. That is a Vaishnava practice. That is a recommended practice you could do. People do that, and schedule times after the departure of people from the world, regardless of how they happen to leave. So our relationship with them is it's different after they leave the planet, and it's not over, because our relationship is not with the body anyway. Our relationship is with the soul. That's the whole undercurrent of Bhagavad Gita. Is Krishna's like, hey, I know you have to go to war and it sucks, but first of all, you're not your body, neither are they. And so everything in Bhagavad Gita and Bhakti culture is based on that. So definitely our relationship with them continues as long as we wish it to, which is very beautiful and very encouraging, I find.
That, just a question relating back to this, like punishment. I know that's not really a word that I feel great about, but consequence, thank you, is really about lifting us up. And one of the things, of course, that I was thinking of, you know, when I have worked with people in the prison system who I have even been like, whoa, they are really far gone from ever finding sanity or compassion. And my question is that an opportunity where the sort of like, you're kind of done, you're gonna be a cat now, or like, okay, you've done this a few times in the life before he says you're getting a timeout as a cat now, like, or not a cat, because that would be a lovely life, but like, you know what I'm saying, like the punishment, the consequence. Do you get a few times with that? Because sometimes I feel like, sometimes I have felt in sitting with someone, a murderer, that this isn't the first time they've done it, and it's not going to be the last. Like, you can see the darkness. They came in with it,
right?
They're gonna leave with it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I hear you. I understand your question. The short answer is that it's kind of not for us to try to figure out, which is good because it's really complicated. In the fourth chapter, Krishna said, "Kim karma karmiti kaviyo pyatra mohitaha." What is action? What is inaction? What are the consequences of them? It's very difficult to understand, he says. And in general, Vaishnavas, practitioners of bhakti, do not concern themselves with the technicalities and details of karma as much as other like students of scripture within the same tradition. Because for us, we're less interested in micromanaging what to do and what not to do, as we are with taking shelter of the Supreme. Whereas for others who get like more into like, okay, which ritual is right here and what's the best here, and like, is this morally better or worse? Are they like, do they have to take birth again? All these like philosophical things. Ultimately, like there is an empowered person who takes care of that. Yamaraj. There's a demigod who is empowered with enough insight into the hearts of all persons to judge what their next destination is. They oversee the process of death and rebirth. That's not my job. And I don't have that capacity. And they're empowered directly from Krishna. They're happen to be a particularly advanced demigod. And Krishna as a super soul is the witness of all those things. So if that non-repentant, unreformed murderer who came into this life with a lot of tamas is not qualified for a human birth next, we don't know. But we can deal with them according to what spiritual culture says about what to do for us, for them, what we can do for them while they're here. and afterwards, you know. The other thing to mention in regards to that is when it comes to reformation and karma and getting, you know, what you deserve, bhakti isn't about getting what we deserve at all, really. It's about breaking that whole thing entirely and invoking the mercy of the divine and getting far more than what anybody deserves. So when a devotee, somebody with devotion, intercedes on the behalf of anybody, they're doing so in terms of that compassionate factor of the Lord, that this is beyond the rules and regulations. This is beyond what they did and deserve. This is beyond what happened and what's right. This is like, I'm asking for, you know, help them. I know they don't deserve it, right? I know they did wrong, but you can do that. You can ask for the reformation of somebody. You can act in such a way as to help inspire and uplift somebody regardless of what their background is. I mean, like, what did Srila Prabhupada do? We came to a place where people were just systematically forgetting about themselves, taking intoxication and just doing whatever. And he put his own spiritual practice on hold just to help and offer the opportunity to any number of people. This is a Vaishnava, this is bhakti. And I happen to know that many of those people, by their own admission, were circling the drain, you know, and by the entrance of bhakti into their lives, they became, what to speak of, you know, saved from gross degradation. They became actually saintly, amazing people. So that attitude of offering liberally, of being indifferent to the qualifications and disqualifications, that is very much the attitude of the devotee and of bhakti culture. So because of that, we don't concern ourselves so much, unless it's our duty, unless we're in the reformatory system, we're in the prison system, we're a parent, we're a teacher, you know, we are a manager of somebody, we're an overseer at work. Like, if you have that job, you got to do it. If you don't, be grateful you don't have that job, because it's not fun. It's not fun to have to punish other people and figure out what they need. And so that also goes with, like, if somebody like offends you, don't sit around thinking what they deserve, because then you'll start getting what you deserved. You don't want that. Just start, you know, try to practice tolerance and compassion. Okay, yeah, they stepped outside of what's right, and I've also done that. And so that attitude is like the attitude of a devotee, instead of, okay, yeah, you know what, they deserve this. Because if we're focused on that, we end up coming back ourselves for the sake of being right or whatever. Hope that answers. Not to sidestep your question entirely, but it is also kind of impossible to answer with our current level of understanding. That's why you have to have someone like Yamaraj do it. Yeah, it's hard enough just being a judge in this world, what to speak of like judging souls. Not for us to do. Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. So when you read the text 18, you know, bewildered by false ego, strength, pride, lust, anger, so on and so forth, it's blaspheme against real religion.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, I actually had a conversation with, oddly enough, my boss a couple of days ago, about religion. And for the first time, I was really kind of talking to him about, you know, my path with bhakti, because he jokes about a lot of stuff and is not aware that he's being offensive toward me and my faith. But at one point he mentioned, you know, that he's not a religious man at this point because there's so many wars you know, about religion, you know, about, you know, so many people have been killed because of religion, and, you know, my way is the right way. So you don't agree. So we're going to fight over it. I was just curious, like, what, you know, when I was trying to describe what we believe in, and he brought that up, how would you respond to someone about our stance, you know, as a bhakti, you know, in our Krishna consciousness, about those holy wars and how the bhakti path is different?
Well, the short answer is that I probably agree with their objections and their concerns. The long answer is that you know, Arjuna is being asked to go to war. It looks like the same thing as, like, some suicide bomber blowing themselves up in Israel or something, right? It's not. And the reasons for that have to do with, for example, if you look at what Bhagavad Gita is saying through and through, it's about having integrity and looking at what our motivations are. If you look at the motivations of people in the so-called holy wars, there's always a money trail. There's always some way in which money or power is involved, because that's what people are attached to in this world. In fact, in the case of the Pandavas, like Arjuna, the good guys of the Bhagavad Gita, their opposition were clearly motivated in Mahabharata, the backstory of Bhagavad Gita, by personal ambition. And that's made clear so that we can understand the difference between them and Arjuna and his family, who weren't motivated that way. They were motivated by taking care of the people and protecting them. And so it's not like yeah, the first thing I do with that kind of objection is say that, yeah, I agree. You know, I was born in a country where religious violence was a major problem. That's why I don't live in that country anymore, personally.
Mhm.
I can relate to that. And I have a lot of empathy for that perspective, that is a misuse of the human form, a misuse of religion, a misuse of spiritual things. It's very bad. It's very bad. And at the same time, I don't personally accept the idea that violence is always unjustified. If it were so, then there would be no need for any no justification for any intervention when somebody is doing harm to someone else. You know, if you're walking down the street and someone is harming someone else, if you truly believe that violence is always unjustified, you could never do it. You can never physically restrain them from performing their violence against the other person, because that would also be violence. It's not actually a consistent philosophy. Someone somewhere at some point has to take the responsibility to be like, no, you can't do that to somebody else. That's not okay.
Right.
You're put in, you know, like prison or like timeout or whatever has to happen. There can be an intervention. I believe that is reasonable. And so I think that person probably does too, because that's actually not a particularly controversial opinion. However, in the 4th chapter, Krishna says that one of the things that draws people away, 4:13, from spiritual life is anger. And in the purport, he talks about how because of hypocrisy, no, not 13, 10, 4:10, purport to 4:10. You can read that purport, there's more there. Because of anger, due to seeing so much hypocrisy, so much contradiction, people throw their hands up and say, there is no God. There can't be anything real, because that person is saying they represent God, and that person is saying they represent God, and those people over there are saying they represent God, and they're all crazy. So there's not any God. That's not actually logical, right? Just like if I point out 3 different kinds of counterfeit bills, that doesn't mean there's no such thing as currency that's valid. That's not proof at all. That's frustration. So that's not actually a logical or philosophical objection to religion or spiritual truth. That's an emotional one, which is fine. We have emotions. They're fed up. They're fed up with people being hypocritical. They're fed up with counterfeit spirituality. Mm-hmm. So they're not interested at that point in a philosophical discussion. You should address them, if you are going to address them, on the level of like, yeah, that does suck. I empathize with your frustration. I also am frustrated with, these are my experiences with counterfeit spirituality. And if you're interested, I can tell you about my experiences with authentic spirituality, which isn't showy and doesn't go around waving banners and expressing that we should be blowing ourselves up or performing holy wars. It's much more, it's much quieter and less about blowing a trumpet or belonging to a certain group. And if you want, I can talk to you about that. And if not, that's okay. That's the perspective I would have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I would try not to take it personally, because it isn't really an objection to Bhakti or Bhagavad Gita. It's an emotional reaction to being frustrated by people hurting people. It's painful. And it can create like a mass rejection. Like, forget about that whole spirituality thing. It's all nonsense, because I'm tired of all of it. That's what's happening at a less than conscious level for these people. And it's really common, especially in this day and age. It's very common. Mm-hmm. So be prepared for that. Be ready for people to feel that way, and understand that's probably what they're dealing with internally. They've been let down enough that's happened for them.
Well, I think
Temporarily.
that's some of the harm that Christianity and other organized religions has done, is given that type of response, that people are ready to argue it or to bring something negative to the table because of their own harm that they've experienced, or the Netflix movie they watched about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah, and it's just to be clear, it's not a Christian problem, it's a human problem. It's found in every tradition, including our own, notably. You can misrepresent bhakti. It has been done. Misrepresent Bhagavad Gita. So yeah, I think like the attitude to take is an attitude of trying to connect with what they're feeling and empathize and hear it.
Not get defensive.
Don't get defensive, because if you get defensive, it feels like all the kind of like apologetic stuff that they've dealt with from so-called spiritual people who are just covering up for the mistakes that their tradition has made. It's like, yeah, what you're pointing to, that is bad. I don't agree with that either. And if I see it in my tradition, I would also be a whistleblower. However, I'm fortunate enough, personally speaking, I don't see it in my sangha. I don't see it among my teachers. I didn't leave a country where religion went crazy to join a cult of another religion in another continent. I've been very careful, personally speaking, to watch out for that, and I don't see it. I don't see those kinds of hypocrisies in my immediate circle. That's why they are my circle. That's why I choose to associate with them and put my heart there. I cannot also personally take responsibility for everyone who practices bhakti. That's not fair for me to try to do. It's not a monolithic thing that because one person does something, it represents all of us. I'm not gonna apologize for men or humans or Americans or 43-year-olds, just turned 43. It's like, we're not our categories. We have a responsibility to find the sangha that supports us and that represents our values and align with that. And don't take it personally when someone else has a problem with our sangha, because they don't really have a problem with that. They have a problem with what they have seen be hypocritical or abusive. Wow, a lot of really good conversation today.
Light topics.
Light topics, really easy. Yeah, Cheryl and Samantha have to go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything? It's almost 8 o'clock. Is there anything else we'd like to explore? Keeping in mind, we will continue our exploration on WhatsApp and discussion. All right. Well, so on that note, it's a short chapter, but a rich one. Just 24 verses. So read chapter 16 and any purports you feel drawn to. And next week we'll read the 17th chapter, the second last chapter. And then we're going to read the 18th chapter. Try to get it done in a week. Even though it's a rather long chapter, we'll probably speed through the first half of chapter 18 to get through the conclusions. And so a reminder, please give your opinions and feedback on how you want these bhakti classes to continue, because that's what I'm here for. And they will continue after Kelly and I come back from India.
Here.
Yeah.
Many of the people in the group are coming to India.
And many of the people in the group are coming to India. Jai. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Bhagavad Gita as it is ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And also please offer some reflection or feedback, takeaway in the WhatsApp, and continue with the difficult questions and exploration too. There's a lot of good stuff that came up today. Don't have to feel like you have to stop now. Let's continue exploring them on WhatsApp. I'm available also for one-on-one messages. Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.